I'm CK Jensen, and the sponsor for Quid Pros Quo today is my book coaching service, Blue Caterpillar Consulting. The Blue Caterpillar asks Alice, of Alice in Wonderland fame, questions like, who are you, where are you going, and what do you want? These are all important questions for an author to know. Who are you, and what does your voice sound like? Where and how are you going to share your book with the world? What are your goals with writing? I'm passionate about helping you answer these questions so you can learn how to be a better writer and how to improve your process so writing brings you more joy. If you're ready to level up your writing, you can email bluecaterpillarconsulting@gmail.com or visit the website at ckjensenauthor.com/BCC. BCC as in Blue Caterpillar Consulting. I can't wait to hear from you, and I hope you enjoy the episode. Welcome to Quid Pros Quo, where creativity meets academia. Here, we're all about leveraging our love of academia to improve both your creative writing practice and ours. Whether you're honing your craft or just beginning your writing journey, we're here to share scholarly insights, inspiration, and advice that benefits us all. Let's get started. Hi, and welcome to Quid Pros Quo. I'm Rin.
And I'm Zach.
And today we are so happy to be joined for our Politics of Speculative Fiction roundtable discussion by author Will Cornell. He's been on the show before. If you haven't seen that episode where we talked about, I think it was religious politics and fantasy, and that was a world-building style episode, you should go check those out. We'll put those in the show notes. Will, welcome back to the show.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, we're happy to have you.
Will, over the course of this series, we've been talking about a lot of ways that politics intersects and informs our writing. We've talked about it from the stance of the actual text that we produce, the kinds of political commitments that inform our writing, how that intersects with genre. And then we've talked a little bit about self-censorship and about how sometimes we as authors change the way that we write because of market expectations or because of political expectations. And so we kind of wanted to start this conversation by asking you, who and what do you write for, and kind of how did you arrive at that decision?
Oh, starting off with the big questions. Okay. Who and what do I write for? Well, who do I write for? My audience, at least my intended audience, I think are people that tend to read adult fantasy. So these are people that maybe like more political fantasy, maybe not in the same way that you're talking about here, but the kind that is back and forth and political games and subterfuge and betrayal. Anyone kind of liking stories that deal a lot with that kind of topic. What do I write for? I just like to tell stories. I like to write so I can tell stories.
Yeah, I love that.
That's as reason as any.
Yeah.
I mean, like I mentioned before, a lot of the ways that we interact with politics does have to do with motivation for writing, right? Mm-hmm. So, Will, for the audience that you described and for the reasoning you described, it sounds like the political component of writing is kind of somewhere in the middle, right? It's not the overriding factor. It's not something that is unimportant either, but somewhere in between, right? Going back to the whole spectrum thing that we'd love to talk about on Quid Pros Quo.
Yeah, for sure. There might not be a motivation behind every story I tell, but there are definitely themes that make their way into my stories.
Mm-hmm.
That you could tie back to politics or political conversations outside of my writing.
Sure. And that makes me think, Zach, of your bio in the show notes, where you blend the thematic concerns of literary genres with you said something else about speculative fiction, but you blend thematic literary with basically fun speculative.
Yeah, that's the hope. I think for me, it's kind of interesting because this is one of the things that I've, thought about more and more recently, just as far as thinking about economics, thinking about, what is the real reason why I do this, and is the way that I operate aligned with the reason why I write. Mm-hmm. And like Will, I really like telling stories. And that's part of the reason why I write. But I also write with the hope that my stories will like impact people and will move them somehow. Because I remember I've read lots and lots, just the same as you two have. And there got to be a point where reading of some books became boring because the plots were recycled, where it's like, oh no, this person fell off a cliff. I bet they're going to show up on the next page. Yep, they're back. They're not dead yet. And so that was one of the things that I was rebelling against in my debut, is that when I killed somebody, they were dead and they were gone and they are not coming back. Thank you. End of story. So I think in that way, I also write to point towards my own vision, if that makes sense.
That does make sense. I think for me, like you two, but like both of you two, I love telling stories. I've been like immersed in stories since I was a kid. And I would say I write for I write for my inner child, and I write for like what I needed, the story I needed to hear when I was growing up, especially as like a queer person in a high demand religion that didn't like queer people very much. Mm-hmm. I have focused my writing now on being very queer friendly and queer joy focused, which is maybe a very outspoken political statement for many people. I always like to say I don't think being queer is political. I think it is highly politicized. So I write for my younger self. I write for younger queer people who need it. But I very much adhere to the idea of window books and mirror books, where a window book is one that lets you see into another's experience, and a mirror book that is one that lets you see into your own experience, and both help you understand that experience a little bit better. So I write my books primarily to be mirrors for my experience and for other queer experiences. But then I want them to be accessible to people who aren't queer, so they can have a window book experience. Because I remember before I realized I was queer, I remember reading like the Percy Jackson Chronicles and not understanding what Nico meant when he said, "You're not my type, Percy." But then as I like got into the later books and got a little older, as like Heroes of Olympus was published, I was like, oh, he's like gay. And that was very much a window experience for me, because at the time I didn't know I was gay. And now I write so people can have that same experience, so they can engage with, and we've talked about this on the show before, they can engage with stories that help them understand other people better. Mm-hmm. I think my goal is just promoting understanding of the human condition, human experience. So, very long-winded way to say I like to write books. So now that we've talked about who and what we're writing for, let's talk about how the politics of speculative and fiction inform what and how we write. As a reminder to listeners, we talked about genre stances in the second episode of this podcast, where liberal was a commitment to changing public life to better reflect the perception of the good life. Conservative was preserving public life as it is. Revolutionary is returning to how public life used to be. And authoritarian is like defining public life on the basis of loyalty to an individual organization. And we talked about how different genres were various political alignments, such as fantasy usually being a liberal genre and science fiction kind of splitting between liberal and conservative. Horror is conservative, romance is liberal, and sometimes revolutionary. So lots of fun stuff in those episodes. Just a quick refresher for those of you who haven't listened to that episode in a month. With that knowledge of how, as we're primarily science fiction and fantasy writers here on this podcast tonight, how does knowing that like fantasy is typically like a liberal genre, how does that like inform our writing? Like, should it inform our writing, do you guys think?
I think it should. And maybe even if I take a step back from that, I think it inherently will for most writers.
Right.
Just because of, well, I think of most of the stories you've read growing up. Some of the ones that come to my mind are The Hunger Games, The Maze Runner, Percy Jackson. And all of these have some component of taking a step closer to that utopian sense of society, or changing things from how they were. So I think it's very difficult, actually, to find stories that are at the forefront of our culture that don't kind of play already in that space. And that reflects a lot in a lot of writing.
That makes sense. I want to take one of the examples you just offered because I know you love the Hunger Games.
I love.
You talk about like it moving forward and like dystopian, I guess, is not fantasy. But like you talk about moving towards a utopia, and then you also mentioned the Hunger Games, and I just want to get more thoughts on that. I want to tease more thoughts out of you on that. I just was wondering if you have more thoughts on it.
If I have my definitions right, the liberal portion of fantasy or sci-fi or dystopian is not accepting the world as it is and moving to a world that is better.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that takes 3 books, right? It takes 3 Hunger Games books to move to a world that is better. But ultimately, you know, they start in the districts. They start essentially in enslavement to the capital. And the whole struggle of the series is, well, one, accepting that they are treated less than by the capital, and then accepting Katniss, her role in changing that. And then in book 3, obviously, by the end, you know, she has made a significant difference. She did topple the government, and then another one. And so it's a changed world by the time we finish that book. And it's stepped away from the horrors of the past.
Yeah. I love that phrase, it stepped away from the horrors of the past.
Yeah, the epilogue is really important in establishing that, right? Because you get to see what a world is like where Katniss can have a child without worrying about the reaping.
Honestly, I forgot there was an epilogue at the end of Mockingjay. I've not read that book since I was probably 15. That was like news to me. I'm like, Katniss has a child?
I need to go back and reread the old books.
I really do need to go reread them. I think they're so relevant in this day and age. Like, Will, to promote Will a little bit, just had a silent recommendation reel of relevant books in our day and age, and I thought it was fantastic recommendations like 1984 and Fahrenheit 451 and The Hunger Games. So,
yes.
Go check out Will on social media. Will, what's your handle?
Will Cornell _author.
Excellent. I thought that's what it was. I wasn't going to say it wrong. Zach, let's get your thoughts on, you know, genre alignment and politics of speculative fiction in influencing our writing, and like how and should it?
Yeah. So one of the things that I thought about in preparing for this series was Ursula Le Guin's essay, The Stalin in the Soul. And Le Guin's concern in that essay is specifically talking about commercialization and about how there is an insidious form of censorship where people don't tell the story that they want to tell because they are afraid that it won't sell well. And so their masterpiece goes undone, and instead they're just writing pot boilers, is the term that they used in like the 20th century to describe these sort of Mad Lib kind of books where you knew the structure and you knew the setup and how everything was going to go. Maybe you have one twist in there or some sort of inversion. And I think today the danger of The Stalin in the Soul is perhaps even more prevalent than it was before, just because with how quickly publishing moves and with how indie publishing is fitting into the broader picture, it becomes really easy for people to decide, you know, I want to pay off my mortgage with my writing, and so I am going to copy paste my plots over and over and over again, and we're just going to change the names, change the settings, you know, that kind of thing.
The quick release schedule,
right? And I mean, some people don't do that. Some people just do have the time to be able to write a bajillion books in a year, and I think most of them start most of them have names that start with B and end in Brandon. I think, and Le Guin didn't talk about this inside of her essay, but one of the things that I've been thinking about in the context of this episode is how self-censorship can happen for people on the political basis too. With Le Guin's essay, she didn't talk about this, but one of the things that I think about is how that relates to self-censorship around politics, where, are there authors who decide, I'm not going to write that because it's too political or it's too weird. And I get the sense that there is kind of a balkanization inside of social media spaces where you have like your conservative authors over here and you have your liberal authors over here. And as we talked about in the genre alignments episode and in the political commitments episodes, you can't map political parties very well onto these general political commitments, right? Because in some ways the Democrats are conservative and in some ways the Republicans are revolutionary or liberal in some cases, right? And so I think about that, and I think about, are there things that I want to say that are not popular? Are there things that I want to say that don't fall easily into these different groups? And am I going to censor myself based off of those things? And with my limited catalog, I can say that hasn't happened yet, but I honestly don't know if it will happen in the future. I definitely approach my politics in a sort of bricolage sort of way, where it's like I look around and I am mostly concerned with what is true, not what aligns with one particular ideology or not. So, I'll go over to liberalism and say, I like this. And I'll go over to conservatism and say, I like this. And I'll go over to anarchism and socialism and I'll say, these are good too. And, you kind of put it all together. And what you get is some kind of weird chimera thing that doesn't fit on a bookshelf somewhere. Right?
Right.
But I don't think that's a good enough reason to kill the chimera.
Yeah, I totally get that. Going back a little bit to add on to something you were saying, you talked about self-censorship and like people like just don't even start writing their masterpieces, as we put it. And I feel like I see that a lot in like baby authors, like young authors, in that they are young in their writing careers, not necessarily that they are young people, like young humans. But so often I get asked like, oh, do you think this is interesting? Like, will people read this? And I'm sure you both have had an experience with a young author who like comes to you and says, oh, is this even interesting? Will anyone read it? And I think that like speaks to self-censorship, because if someone tells them like, I personally wouldn't read that, they may take that as, oh, no one is going to like it. And then if no one is going to like it, what's the point of writing it? Which I feel circles back to the first question, like, for whom and why do you write?
Yeah.
So like, and I was thinking about that a lot as you were talking about your chimera, and I wanted to put that in, like, self-censorship happens at, not just censorship happens at a lot of levels, and we talked about it as curation and censorship in institutional and grassroots organizations such as Indie and Trad Pub.
Yeah.
Switch that irrespectively, I suppose I should say. And I think that it's just an interesting phenomenon to me that, like, because maybe because I'm the opposite of it, like, I don't care if anyone else will like it. Like, I write it, like, first and foremost for myself. Like, I'm working on this, like, weird fantasy that is, like, so heartbreaking and about necromancy and grief. And, like, no one, I don't know that people will like it, but then, like, my early beta readers say they love it. But, like, I didn't know that people would like it when I started writing it, you know? So it's just, I don't know, I'm just fascinated by this. I've also been thinking about this a lot. My thoughts are not as crystallized as Zach's are, I can tell.
I'm still getting there. I still don't know, right? Because I think part of the reason why this is tricky is because it kind of fits within a broader conversation about the commercialization of our hobbies, right? Because I was not alive during I was not conscious, I should say, during the golden days when people were just posting things on the internet because they were posting things on the internet. And, people would read them, maybe they wouldn't, but that was just something that you did without this sort of ever-present need to be like, oh, well, you should monetize this. You should make this your full-time career or whatever. Whereas today, I feel like, at least in many of the author circles that I run in, there's a lot of pressure to build it out into whatever, right? I don't know. Will, have you had a similar experience as far as as you're getting going for your debut?
Yeah, I think I have. I wouldn't say that I really censored myself a lot in preparing for my current debut, but I know exactly what you're talking about. I was on the phone with Rin a couple weeks ago, and I had mentioned that I saw a reel by some author. I can't remember who it was, but basically he was promoting his book as apolitical. This has no political stances, so everyone will love it. And we kind of thought that was really interesting. We kind of had a conversation, though, that I don't know, and maybe there are some outlier cases, but I don't know if any book can be apolitical.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Because this, at least in this context, the apolitical book was saying, well, it doesn't include things like themes on gender identity or sex or feminism or, pick your poison right there. I mean, it was a very safe book for quote unquote any reader. Now, in my view, that's not apolitical, right? That seems to be just, like we were kind of defining earlier, a protection of how things are.
Mm-hmm.
So they're saying, well, this has the most traditional family values, the most traditional protagonists, the most traditional themes, whatever that may be. And so in my mind, like I said, I think that a book can't be apolitical. It's a reaction to political themes that exist in some books.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's also political in nature by saying, well, that shouldn't be included in literature.
Right.
For sure.
Yeah. So long story short, if I see a theme that I want to include in my books, well, I think I should, and it fits into the story, then I think I will.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like you're touching on this idea of because this is something I've been thinking about, heavy-handedness in authors. I saw a reel or something or a TikTok on this the other day before I deleted all the social medias from my phone because my screen time is way too high. But I saw this thing, it's heavy-handedness in authors is it was two sides of the argument, and one side was authors should be heavy-handed. But then it's if authors are heavy-handed, then it's promoting anti-intellectualism, I think was the word.
I saw that one.
Right,
yes.
Okay, yeah. And it was well, authors should be heavy-handed, and it's but we're losing subtlety, and we're losing, the ability to think for ourselves. And it was just I feel like that's something you're touching on, Will, is that authors can try to avoid the themes that they feel are political. But I remember specifically on that call a couple of weeks ago, you said, yeah, he's promoting traditional family values. I'm that's so political.
It's just not the political idea that you would generally, lump into the category of political.
Yeah,
right.
It's a political idea, but it's not politicized in the way that maybe more.
Yeah, a traditional family isn't going to be... If you see a traditional family in a movie, no one's going to get upset.
Right.
But if you see a family with two dads in a movie, then a lot of people will be upset.
Right.
Yeah. And they're both equally political, and my personal belief is neither of them should be, politicized.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. And I think you made a great point that one of them is politicized.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So I've just been thinking a lot about, censorship and heavy-handedness, and I'm glad we're doing this series. This is good. Oh, go ahead. I was going to say we should probably move on pretty soon. We're at 25 minutes.
Yeah. I will throw in a quick thought about the heavy-handedness. I think the heavy-handedness is part of the equation about why people are upset. Because I think there are readers who feel like they're being talked down to. I have actually sworn off a very popular author because I cannot stand their prose and how just like in your face it is about their political statements. And this is a popular author. People love their stuff, but I don't vibe with it. I prefer the nuance. I mean, I was reading Mrs. Frisbee and the Rats of Nim, which won the Newbery Award in the 70s. And there is an extended discussion by these super intelligent rats about the nature of the good life and about whether it is possible to live the good life if you are constantly stealing from society. And I'm like, that is so deep. It's so deep. It's a bunch of talking rats, but we're thinking about how should we organize our society and what are the basis that we want to put around our society. But it's not, because it's couched in talking rats living on a farm and trying to escape to the woods, it's much more subtle than like a footnote that's telling you about how you should feel about a particular thing that's happening inside of the story because it's racist, as an example.
I just finished reading Becky Chambers' Monk and Robot series, which is A Song for the Wild Built and A Prayer for the Crown Shy. And in the second book, A Prayer for the Crown Shy, the monk, who is sibling Dex, explains to Mosscap the robot how it's not money, it's not currency. And like Dex physically recoils at the idea of money because this is a utopian society. But their form of exchange is called Pebs, which is short for Pebbles. And it had like a world building reason for being called Pebs. But he says, Mosscap, you are like accumulating these Pebs and you can give them to other people like in exchange for like basically goods and services. But you don't have to like give it exactly to the person who you're exchanging the goods or services from. Like if you want like a carrot from a farmer, you don't necessarily have to like give your Pebs to the farmer. You just have to pay the Pebs forward to another person in the society. And it's this idea of like communal living. And I thought this because you were talking about Rats of Nim and the good life. I'm like, oh, this is the good life where you can like, this is my idea of the good life where you can exchange these things in society. And as long as you're going for communal benefit, like that's what matters. Mm-hmm. And they talk about like going into like negative Pebs, which like it's not even like a physical thing. Like they keep track of it in like a computer system. But they say if you like, no, everyone goes in the negative sometimes, and that's okay. If someone is consistently in the negative, it's a sign that they like need more help and support. And I thought that was just such like a kind and generous way to like look at people who are struggling, because I don't know, it felt very topical and relevant because there's a lot of people who are really struggling in the world today. But yeah. I was just, I don't know. And like similarly to your Rats of Nim story, I was like, it didn't feel like it was preaching to me, which I think that's my issue, is when books feel like preachy. I don't like it. And most people don't like it. And that goes back to the heavy-handedness and everything.
Right.
We are coming up on half an hour already, and we still have one more question. So we should ask, how should the politics of speculative fiction inform our publishing? And we are all indie authors here. I know I'm pursuing Trad Pub. I think Zach is firmly an indie pub for the rest of his life, as far as I'm aware. He's nodding in the video call. Will has gone back and forth. I don't know where you are right now. Will?
I'm on Indie Pub right now, but okay. I haven't sworn off Trad Pub.
Okay, cool. And I'm actively seeking Trad Pub, as I said. So we are all going to be speaking primarily from an indie perspective on this idea of how politics of speculative fiction should inform our publishing. I just wanted to like put that in as like a caveat, and then maybe share a secondhand story from someone I know vaguely through the interwebs of traditional publishing and censorship and all that. So go ahead, talk about it.
Oh, well, I think, okay. So if I understand your question right, is how should these themes of politics influence traditional publishing or publishing?
Or indie publishing. Just our publishing in general. Like, as we choose to publish books, how should speculative fiction politics inform that choice? How are they influencing that decision? Are they influencing what we decide to put out, which goes back to censorship?
Yeah.
I think that indie publishing is, well, here's the thing about indie publishing, is it can pivot so much quicker than traditional publishing. Someone can decide to write a story, and if they really want to, they can crank out a book in a month and they can have it available for purchase that month. Now, that's a lot of writing. That's crazy. But it could be done. And people do it in maybe a timeline longer than that. But the ability to kind of look and see these different political themes and then write them into a story and get them out there is really adaptable. I think you see this a lot with trends. For example, romance is big right now. And I know a few authors that don't typically write romance, but because romance is so big, they write romance subplots into all their books now because, well, they're going to be published in a few months anyway. So it'll still be big in a few months. I'll just put these themes in there, which isn't something I normally write. So maybe, if there's a topic that's popular or unpopular that they would consider putting in a book, it can be taken out very easily and very quickly.
Right. Sure. You said romance is really big right now, and I just want to point out, because I'm a lover of romance, that romance is always big and is a top-grossing genre consistently. So,
agreed.
Romance sells.
It definitely has a spotlight on it right now, though.
Yeah,
even
romantasy is much bigger than it has been in the past.
Yeah.
And we could do a whole opinion episode on romantasy and all of that, because I know we all have opinions on romantasy, but that's not what we're here to talk about today.
I think I want to take a step back with just thinking about publishing, right? Mm-hmm. Because I think people are right to point out that when we think about publishing as an institution, right, when what we call trad pub is a creature of the 20th century. Big publishing houses, editors, cover artists that are all working under one roof in order to, put authors out there. That is a creation of the 20th century. You go back to the 19th century, the 18th century, and before, it's a lot more common for people to be doing what we would call indie publishing today. It just looks different because we have the internet, right? I think there's also something to be said about when we talk about publishing, we are talking about making something public, right? It doesn't necessarily mean that you're selling something. And so for me, part of the reason why I think about these things is because when I think about the value and the purpose of storytelling, right, generally, and what story and how storytelling fits into the good life, I have questions about if storytelling is something that's really important for the good life, why lock it behind, intellectual property? Why lock it behind money, right? There's the anarchism, showing through. So I have questions about that. I've experimented with writing short stories and then releasing them under Creative Commons, which allows people to basically copy and remix the story for free. They don't have to ask me for permission or anything like that. So part of the appeal of indie publishing for me is that I get to decide what it means. I get to decide whether I want to, make my ebooks free and then sell my paperbacks to finance the ebooks. I get to decide if I want to put my books out under Creative Commons. I get to make those decisions in and of myself. And I don't have to kill my chimera, right? I don't have to sacrifice, like what Will was saying, I don't have to sacrifice the subplot or the elements that are, not gauche or unpopular. There are consequences to that, right? It's not as if I can just do it and still have the same results as somebody who is writing directly to market. But I value the flexibility and the ability to experiment that comes with indie publishing.
Sure. This episode is going so long and I'm dreading editing it, so I'm just going to share Chris's story. So I recently joined the AuthorTube space like in the last year or so, and on there, the author K.M. Fajardo, I believe is how you say her last name. I really hope I'm saying it right. But her debut novel comes out this fall. It's called Local Heavens. It's a Great Gatsby retelling that I'm really excited for. If we were going with genre alignments, from what I know about it, it's like a liberal science fiction novel. It's like a cyberpunk Gatsby retelling, which is so cool. I'm so excited for it. I gotta go pre-order it once I have money again. But she talks about how she wrote the book never expecting it to be published. Like, she gave it to her agent being like, I don't think anyone's going to buy this. And obviously, it's her debut. Like, it's coming out, and, like, I haven't read it yet. It comes out in, like, October. But, like, I think sometimes, not to be, like, in defense of trad pub, but, like, in defense of trad pub, we often talk about how so many people lose creative, like, freedom in the trad pub industry. And, like, I'm sure there are horror stories, and, like, I've heard a couple horror stories, like, through the interwebs. But most of my friends in trad pub are like, honestly, this is fine.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know. So I think there's definitely nuance in each publishing path, and Will and Zach are, like, totally right that you have more freedom. Like, you're not going to be asked to take anything out of your books if you indie pub, whereas you might be asked to trad pub. But I think that people are, especially, we talked in the very first episode of this series how, like, people are perceiving the trad pub industry as leaning to the American left. I'm pointing to my left, and that might be right for you guys. I don't know. The American left. But just because it is leaning to the American left, I feel like it's getting more open-minded generally, because it's like, right now, the perception of the American left is that it's aiming towards a good life for a more diverse group of people. So, I don't know. Those were my thoughts. Again, not very well crystallized. Should have thought this through better, but I really enjoyed this talk. I thought this was great.
Me too. This was awesome.
Absolutely. I love these. I love getting to just chat.
They're so good. Our homework for tonight, because, you know, we always do homework on Quid Pros Quo these days, is to go check out Will. Will dropped his handle earlier in the episode. It's Will Cornell _author. That'll be in the show notes. Will, do you have anything else you want to promote?
No, just that
Your book. Tell us about your book.
Yeah. Oh, yes. Yeah. That thing. That whole thing. My book, recently renamed to Those Who Favor Fire, comes out early 2026. It is a political fantasy, and if you like drama and betrayal, and you want to sprinkle in some issues on gender in there as well, then you're probably going to like this book.
Yeah, I've read it. I'm waiting for the next iteration. I'm waiting for Will to finish editing it so I can read it. I am so excited, and if you guys had the video feed right then, you would have seen me, like, go hand over mouth, absolutely gagged. I didn't know you renamed it!
Yeah,
Took my suggestion!
I did take your... It was a really good suggestion.
Thank you, I'm obsessed with that name. I think it's so good. And that is only a little bit self-serving because I came up with it. Okay, we're going to stop the episode here so I can gush to Will more about his book off camera. This has been Quid Pros Quo. This has been our Politics of Speculative Fiction series. This is actually our last episode for the year. We always take a 2 to 3 month hiatus at the end of the year for, well, it's formerly NaNoWriMo and the holidays in December. So we will see you back next year with a new series. And I think the next series, if you're going to give you a sneak peek, is actually about types of series. So that'll be fun. Excellent. Thank you so much for joining us. This has been another great year at Quid Pros Quo. We'll see you next year in 2026.
Quid Pros Quo is hosted by DC Winters and CK Jensen. If you liked this episode, please subscribe and leave us a rating on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. If you'd like to contact us, you can email us at quidprosquo@gmail.com. Thank you for joining us today.